Thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar between PPMD and PTC Therapeutics. PTC Therapeutics has joined us today to discuss the recent update on the development of ataluren, their stop codon read-through product for individuals with Duchenne that have nonsense mutations. I'm Eric Camino, I'm PPMD's Vice President of Research, and I'm joined by Pat Furlong, our founder and CEO. And joining us from PTC, we have Stu Peltz, the founder and CEO of PTC, as well as Matthew Klein, the Chief Operating Officer. I'm sure many of you saw recently that PTC shared an update with the community that the FDA stated their data from their most recent completed study, Study 41, did not support an NDA submission. And of course, we've had a lot of questions from the community, and we wanted to make sure that we could address those and talk through what that means for the development of ataluren here in the States. As we go through the talk today, we do invite those in watching the webinar to submit any questions you have in the chat. We'll try to address them as we kind of move through our discussion. And this will be recorded and posted to PPMD's website. So if you have any friends or family that this would benefit from watching this, please do share with them. But we would like to welcome Stu and Matthew for both joining us today. You've both been in the space for a long time. PTC has been working with Duchenne for quite some time, and so I think it'd be good to share a little bit of that history before we dive into our discussion.
Sure, I'll start. Well, first let me say it's good to see everybody. It's he's right. We've been working with the community now for a very long time. I'm Stuart Peltz. I'm the founder and CEO of PTC Therapeutics, and I founded PTC in 1998, and the first program that we had working on was for Translarna, which is a read-through program. And then I think we met Pat probably in about 2003 or 4.
I think that's right.
And it was a very interesting time. We were trying to think about 10 to 15% of many different monogenetic disorders patients have their disorder due to a nonsense mutation. And we were thinking about what was which indication should we go in. And after talking to Pat, it was very clear to us that this was an important disorder for us to be part of, and very important to the community. And so that's where we had started. And we knew that there was an animal model for nonsense mutations that we could test. There was obviously patients and families were really interested in clinical trials. There were physicians who wanted to be part of trials, but there was still a lot to learn in terms of the natural history. What are the best endpoints? And so it really was, quite a learning for where we all work together to trying to find not only the natural history, but what are the best clinical endpoints to utilize. And, so we were pioneers here. And I think we really were the first to try and say, from a regulatory perspective, what's the best endpoints and such to utilize. And so over the last, from 2000, probably 4 or 5, till now, we've been working on clinical trials, endpoints, natural history, where we think, and we can have Matt talk later on this, that we think we understand a lot more than we did at the beginning. And I think we have really a large data set of results that demonstrate that Translarna is quite effective for patients who have nonsense mutation Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I'll make a couple other points. Is that we've gotten an EMA, a European Medicine Agency approval in 2014, and we're now patients who have nonsense mutation Duchenne around the world. We now distribute to over 50 countries where patients are receiving it. And the one disappointment is the difficulties we've been having in the US to bring it to patients. And so that's what we're here to talk to you today, which is really we think we have a potent set of results that demonstrate its effectiveness. And what we want to do is tell you how we think we'll bring it forward, and for you guys to think about how you can help. This is a very important time in which I think we're going to need your help, so that we can actually have the FDA take a strong look at this. So I'll stop there, but that's my introduction of the company and the sort of 20 years we've been together.
Well, thank you, Stu, for that. We have been together a long time. So I'm going to sort of give you really quick questions. How many studies have you conducted in the U.S.? I know we started in 2005, right? And you've conducted any number of studies along the way. Can you just give us a total number?
Sure. We've done 3 phase 3 trials. We've done 2 dystrophin trials. We've done, Matt, how many other trials in terms of what's required for PIP and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, we've many, I think, in between registry trials and follow-up studies. I would say we're probably closer to 8 or 9. That I think it's been really, and the other point that's really important is anyone who's participated in any of our studies from the beginning have had the option to continue on ataluren. We have now about 150 individuals in the United States who remain on ataluren, which is getting close in some cases to almost 2 decades, which is really incredible.
Which is really incredible for a company to do, to continue to provide drug free of charge, and so we're very grateful for that, and I'm sure all the families who are on ataluren, Translarna are very grateful for that. So now in study 041, can you tell us a little bit about that study itself? What is 041?
Sure. Let me start and then pass it on to Matt. Which is, so 041 was based on the results what we've gotten previously and from study 007 and study 20 of the PPMD study, was what was a commitment that we made to the Europeans as part of the conditional approval to perform that clinical trial. And this was because people understood how difficult it is in a heterogeneous population of Duchenne patients, and the difficulty of the endpoints, that we'd have to do probably a bigger study and a longer study. So this was the largest clinical trial done in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's, we had 359 boys within the trial from 5 years and older. So we studied the complete population. And as what Matt will show you is that in that study, and we went for 18 months followed by an 18-month follow-up. So it was a placebo-controlled study followed by the patients continued taking the drug for 18 months after, but everybody took it in the second part of it. So we had a placebo portion and a regular portion. And the top line and important points here is that in that larger, longer study, we were able to demonstrate statistically significant improvement in patients using the 6-minute walk test. And that's the first time ever in the ITT population, and that means all the boys, that's what that means, that we saw a statistically significant result. And it wasn't just there as well, it was also in the time function test, the North Star. It was a pretty robust data set. And then also when you pooled the data together with the other trials, it was so highly statistically significant, again, in both the 6-minute walk test, the North Star, and the time function test. And then Matt will also then go through with you. We've also done a registry. And we're in this unique position where when you do clinical trials, they're supposed to help you predict hard endpoints, reflect like what a 6-minute walk test is supposed to reflect, ultimately how long it takes to delay loss of ambulation or improvement in pulmonary function. We also had a registry. We have now over 3,000 patients who have taken Translarna, and we followed them over 5 years, which you don't usually do for a clinical trial. And we've shown substantial elongation in being able to ambulate, as well as improvement in pulmonary function. So the data set is pretty robust, demonstrating the effectiveness of Translarna. And Matt, you want to go through some of the slides and the results?
And Matt, sorry, I'm going to ask a couple more questions before I ask for slides, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Matt, just for the audience, the ITT population, the intent to treat, could you just explain what that, we throw out these terms, and I often worry that the audience hears ITT and they wonder,
what does that mean?
So if you could explain that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. When we do clinical trials, we often have specific criteria for individuals to participate. And in Duchenne, that could be age, it could be how far you could walk on the 6-minute walk test before entering the study. And what we try to do in this study is, as Stu said, this is sort of the granddaddy of all Duchenne trials. It was the largest ever study done, placebo-controlled study, and we wanted to have a trial where we included as many individuals with DMD, nonsense mutation DMD, as possible. So we kept it really, really broad to get as many individuals to participate so we could learn as much as we can and generate the strongest possible evidence that ataluren is effective. However, at the same time, we know that Duchenne, nonsense mutation Duchenne, is heterogeneous, that while everyone has a diagnosis of nonsense mutation Duchenne, there could be differences based on a specific mutation, where someone's at in their disease progression, and all of those factors make it hard in one single study to truly capture how well a drug is working. And so what we often do, in addition to having an overall population, which is what we call the ITT population, we sometimes say that there's smaller groups of patients, either based on mutation or based on, in this case, in this study, where your walk distance is when you start the study, that we think gives us a better chance to capture a significant effect. So there's often several populations in a study. One could be is the overall population or ITT population, and then there's sometimes smaller subpopulations that are different based on, or grouped based on, it could be a genetic mutation, or in the case of study 41, it was based on how much walk distance you had when you entered. So it's really, these subpopulations are things we introduce to try to increase the chances of success. But the important message is that we showed significant benefit in the ITT population, or the overall population, which is much more reflective of the whole diverse nonsense mutation community.
Yes, thank you for that. And it was an incredibly large study, so I appreciate that. So now the FDA has said to you all, or met with you all, and said that they will not accept an NDA, a new drug application. Can you explain what their rationale was, or what happened during that interaction that they made that decision, or said that, however it happened?
Stu, do you want me to take that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, Pat, because we unfortunately didn't have a meeting with the FDA. We asked to have a meeting, and during COVID, what's happened, and continuing after COVID, is the FDA has often said, we're not going to meet with you in person like we used to. Why don't you send us your information and we'll give you some written feedback, and then if you want to talk after, we could talk after. Which of course is very unfortunate for a number of reasons, and I'll tell you why that's the case here in just a second. So what we did is we submitted all the information at study 41, which was this very large study in which we showed for the first time statistically significant benefit on walk test and North Star, all these different assessments in Duchenne, and also showed, importantly, that ataluren was safe and well tolerated. We put that into one big package that also showed how, when you group the data from study 41 with the other studies, we showed highly statistically significant benefit. And then also that long-term registry Stu mentioned, we included that as well, which said this statistically significant benefit we're seeing in the clinical trial over the long term is translating to long-term delays in loss of ambulation, long-term delays in loss of pulmonary function. So we put that together in one big package, sent it off to FDA, and we got back a written letter that basically said that they did not believe that what they saw in our package in study 41 was strong enough to support an NDA. Now, it's very hard when you don't have a discussion with people to actually be able to further, sort of argue and go back and forth and explain all the reasons why there's more than enough data here to support an application and also to support an approval. Certainly when you look at other Duchenne drugs which have gotten approved and also drugs in other rare diseases, we have the largest package showing benefit when you compare it to some of the other things that have been approved. And so while we've got that initial correspondence telling us that they don't believe that we have the strength of data to submit an application, we believe we're still very early on in this battle. If you're a baseball fan, we feel like we're in the first or second inning. And what we want to do now is have that critical live conversation with the agency where we can really sit down and make sure they're doing all of their homework and thinking about the data in every way possible and seeing that the flexibility that they use in other rare diseases could be used here, given the strength of the data. And that's why, as Stu said, what's so important now, why we need the help of the community. And the community's been with us for 20 years. We've been partners and we appreciate the sacrifices that patients and families have made to participate in all those clinical trials that we mentioned. The community was with us when we went to the FDA a few years ago. And, here we are together again, asking your help to be with us in and doing your, and Pat, however you think best to let your voice be heard in terms of telling the FDA that, hey, we deserve drugs too. And if there's data here that shows something safe and something's effective, we need it. We need these therapies. And so where we are now is really at a point where we want to have that conversation that we didn't have the first time around and be able to convince them with your help of that this is a drug that now has the strength of data, the safety data that really should allow it to move forward with an application and ultimately an approval.
No, we realize, look, the way we think about this is, this was far too important of a trial to just get dismissed without having a fair review of the data and a discussion. And we realize that there's a lot of data and it's complicated. And part the complication is because we were pioneers within the field and we had to learn, in a sense, how to do Duchenne muscular dystrophy trials. And the one thing I really learned is, I thought at first when you first go into a new indication and you're the pioneer, that you would get credit as a consequence of that, and you really don't, right? Because you got to remember, when you think about doing clinical trials, the goal is to see the biggest difference between treat and placebo in the time that you're doing the study, right? And therefore, and then it's statistically significant. But that requires you to know what are the best clinical endpoints, what's the natural history, what patient population will best show it in the time frame that you're studying it. We didn't know any of that, right? We needed to define that as part of the studies and understanding the natural history at the same time. And it often almost requires you to both sort of do clinical trials, but build the plane as you go, right? And so you're going to make not errors, but you're not going to be perfect as a consequence of that. So
no, I remember, Stu, when you all first introduced the 6-minute walk test. It was sort of all comers, and then along the way we learned that people who are above 250 meters, I think it is, or 300 meters, are pretty stable for the 12 month or 18 months, and the people who are below are less stable. So there were all these factors that you learned in committing to to Duchenne and trying to learn, because you're right, you're a pioneer. We didn't have an endpoint. So we used the 6-minute walk test, and I remember Craig and others really trying to figure out how can we use this and what are the parameters that are going to be able to be measured appropriately so that we can see a difference. So I think we've come a long way. Matt, you mentioned that the patient community should help. What does help look like in your view? Since FDA is not meeting with everyone, we can't have a string of people trying to make appointments because that's not going to fly, right? So what is help?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I think, look, the FDA tries to do the best they can in getting drugs to individuals affected by different diseases. And I think they are always, always, always interested in hearing from people who have the diseases. They like hearing from you all as patients more than they like hearing from us as drug developers, more than they like to hear from the doctors that take care of you. And what they need to hear is, one, the need, right? That there's a need for drugs. Two, that when there's clinical studies that are done that show benefit and that a drug is safe, that you want to have that option to take that therapy, and that your doctor should have that option to prescribe that therapy. And I think what we've seen as well in other communities, like with people with Friedreich ataxia, the Friedreich ataxia community, there was recently a drug that called OMAV, where the FDA at first said, look, we don't think your data are strong enough to accept your data package for approval. And all of a sudden, the community turned around and put together a petition of that. Not only was it the specific people in the trial, but it was friends of people with Friedreich ataxia. 70,000 people sent a petition to the FDA and said, look, we understand the data. You need to review this application. We want access to this drug. It's safe and it shows a benefit that's important to us. And as a result of that, the FDA did a complete 180 and said, we're going to accept that package. And they've reviewed it, and there's a very good chance that drug will now be approved. So that's just one example of how a community's voice can go a very long way in, one, informing the FDA about how they feel about a drug, and also getting the FDA to act and change an initial negative opinion to a positive opinion. So that's just one example. Letters to the FDA are always helpful, things like that. And Pat, obviously I would defer to you in ways you think that the community can come together and support. I was just suggesting or referencing that petition as one specific recent example where we saw the patient voice not only got the FDA to listen, but it got them to do a complete reversal and allow a drug that was safe and was effective to get to patients who desperately need effective therapies.
And actually,
Yeah, right.
What's interesting there is that if they didn't do that, they would have gone away. It wouldn't have been approved. They would have had to wait years and do another experiment, clinical trial, and it wouldn't have. This now at least is being reviewed, and we'll see if it gets approved. But there's another example that we talk about, Omalac, for ALS. Had the same issue. But here, there are people who went to Congress who they put pressure on. Same thing, they didn't get it. They told them they couldn't submit it. They then put pressure on them. They got it so that they would look at it, and it's now an approved product. So your voice, I think at the end of the day, what we're saying is there is power in the community. And it's important that we, in our view at least, we think it's important that the community just doesn't take a piece of paper says no, go pound sand and go do another experiment. There's enough data here. I think that this should be reviewed, and adjudicated. We should have an advisory committee, and then we'll let the chips go where they may. But I think without that, it seems so patently unfair that it's at least to me it's both frustrating and enraging.
And in this instance too, you don't have just your clinical trial data, but you've all been collecting data post-market in Europe with the STRIDE registry. And I don't know, Matthew, if you can share a little bit about how long that's been collecting data and some of what you've all learned kind of through that process as well. With STRIDE, I think there's sometimes as well with patients wonder whether they can participate or not when they're in the United States, and knowing the differences between kind of what the STRIDE registry is actually doing.
Yeah, as Stu mentioned, ataluren or Translarna is available in 50 different countries. It's been approved by regulatory agencies in countries all around the world. Obviously, FDA stands out as an exception. And what we've done is when folks get on the drug, in a country where it's approved, we follow them very closely over time. What's called real world data. The reason it's called real world data is because it's not like they're in a clinical trial where they have to come into a study site and follow very strict rules. It's really a very practical and meaningful way of understanding what does a drug do over the long term outside of a clinical trial? What is it doing in the everyday life of people with Duchenne? And so what we've been able to do over the past several years, and that's, as Stu mentioned, we first got the European approval in 2014. So this registry has been going for many years, is we've been able to collect data over time and ask the simple question, is ataluren making an impact on disease progression in the long term? What's it doing to time to losing the ability to walk? What's it doing to the time that an individual may lose lung function? And what we've been able to do in hundreds of patients now is answer that question very clearly. And the answer is the drug is doing a lot. In our data from 2021, we took a look and we said we're delaying loss of ambulation by over 5 years. That means that we're slowing or delaying the loss of ambulation, allowing patients to walk for longer and longer, years longer. When we look at lung function, we're seeing we're delaying loss of a significant amount of lung function for almost 2 years. And that's really meaningful because once you start losing lung function, it's very, very debilitating and life-threatening. And so what this data set has been allowed us to do is look over a long period of time in a lot of patients and be able to show that this drug is significantly changing the natural history of disease and preserving ambulation, preserving lung function for years. And that's really, really important because in the end, that's what we're really trying to do, change the natural history of this disease.
So we have a question that came in. What does the FDA say about your p-values? Can you talk about the p-values?
Yeah, sure. So I think, maybe we'll make 2 points. One is we looked at a particular subgroup and then the overall ITT, the overall population. And Matt, you want to go through this a little bit?
Absolutely. Maybe I'll call up. Best way to talk about the p-values is to maybe show the p-values. So what I'll show you here is the p-values in the key endpoints in the study. So what this table shows you is that we had statistical significance, and just for folks who don't know what a p-value is basically saying what are the chances that the benefit that you observe with the drug are happening just by luck alone, just by chance, having nothing to do with the drug. And generally it's said that if you have a p-value of under 0.05, that means this is not happening by chance alone. That drug really is responsible for all of the benefit that you're seeing. And when you look across the endpoints in this study, 6-minute walk test, loss of ambulation, North Star, time function tests, you're seeing p-values that are lower, in this case, much, much lower than 0.05. So what that's telling you is that we're seeing benefits from the drug that are not happening by chance. They truly can be attributed to the way the drug is working and the benefit that the drug is providing. Now, in terms of the FDA's view on these p-values, which was the question, it's a little bit complicated because they often look at different ways of trying to get a p-value. And if you look at it, some ways the p-value could be a little higher, the p-value could be a little lower. But what we've been trying to convince them of is that the tests that we did, the analyses we did, the math that we did to get these p-values is actually the most rigorous way to actually do the math to get these results. And we used very rigorous analyses that actually the FDA themselves have used in other diseases like ALS, as Stu mentioned, and so that we can confidently say that we have p-values or data that when you test them the most rigorous way possible are showing that the drug is really the drug that is responsible for this benefit.
Thank you for that. We have another question that said, so if the patients and families initiate something to be supportive, how is it going to be different than what they did 5 years? How many years was it? 5 years ago?
Yeah,
with F.
So I think the way to think about this is 5 years ago, we as part of the EMA, European Medicine Agency, we were doing another trial. And so there'd be another trial. I think what the patients did 5 years ago was amazing. They were great at advisory committee. I don't think everyone could. I think it was pretty fair that we didn't get to say everything we needed to say because we were shut off on some of the advisory committee. But the families did a great job and the kids did a great job. I think now we're in a different position where we have now 700 patients worth of data. I mean, there really isn't another study to do. You see the data here. Matt, maybe show the data on the pooled analysis. When you see the pooled analysis with all of the patients from not only study 41, but study 020 and 07, which are two other phase 2 trials where we pool them, you can see in the 6-minute walk test, the North Star, the time function test. And there's no reason why you can't do this. This is saying when you have a large number of patients, how does it go? So you could see, substantial improvement in all of them and all highly substantial p-values, right? So again, what are you seeing? You're seeing in different endpoints, improvements on Translarna versus placebo, highly statistically significant when you look at all the patients as well as when you looked at the individuals, and everything's going. One of the things people like to see is, do all the endpoints go in the same direction, right? So sometimes when you see, when people do studies, maybe the 6-minute walk test was positive, but the North Star wasn't, maybe the TFTs weren't. That's not what we see here. Everything improves. So so then you could say, is that by chance? That would be incredibly unlikely. So you're seeing this, and then you look at what Matt talked about with the STRIDE data, which at the end of the day, what you're really asking is, when the 6-minute walk test and North Star, what does that mean? It's supposed to say these clinical endpoints are going to predict hard endpoints like loss of ambulation and pulmonary improvement, that they're indicative of that. So now you have this data, and then you can say, well, we did the long-term studies looking at the registry, and as Matt said, we saw substantial improvement in delaying loss of ambulation, or preserving ambulation, basically, as well as preserving pulmonary function. So you have all this data that says this drug is highly effective in these patients. Now, have we had bumps and bruises along the way? Yes, but part of that was from learning on how to do trials in this area. I mean, as we all know, we've all been part of this. These are difficult trials to do in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but we actually, the thing that I'm very proud of is we actually went and did the clinical trials to look at the effectiveness of this drug. And I think when you look at not only study 41, but the totality of all the data, that is very clear that this drug is effective for these patients.
Yeah, so Stu, what is FDA looking for, and what are your next steps with the FDA? So what happens now, and what do they want? If the patients decide to send them, letters or meet with them or whatever other ways that they consider to interact with FDA, do you think FDA is going to believe their anecdotal evidence if they won't accept the significant amount of evidence that you have provided them?
Well, I guess what I would argue is that, look, we've been very serious and careful in doing clinical trials to understand the effectiveness of this drug, and therefore this deserves and is worthy of saying, how could you disrespect the community to such a level that we won't even review it and take it to advisory committee? I'm not telling them they have to approve it. I'm saying I want to take my chances where there's a review and a discussion and an advisory committee. And I think then, that I'll take from what we get there, but at least then we can say, here we've taken, 700 patients, have done 5 years of study. All the data, while imperfect, the totality of the data clearly demonstrated its efficacy. And this one of the only therapies in Duchenne muscular dystrophy where enough work was done to be able to see the clinical benefit from a clinical endpoint perspective. And yet this won't actually, yet it won't be taken up and reviewed. I just find that, I don't understand that.
Yeah.
One point I'd add to that. I'm sorry.
It doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and I would say one point I'd add is, you many of you may have heard the FDA, particularly Dr. Billy Dunn, who's oversees a lot of these approvals, has very publicly said that, look, in rare diseases, we're not looking for perfect. We have the ability to be flexible and say that in diseases where there's drugs that are safe and there's drugs that are effective and there's a need for drugs because the disease is so serious, we as FDA can be very flexible. And that's what they've done in Friedreich ataxia. That's what they've done in ALS. So I think one message that I think is very important for the community to deliver is, look, we need drugs too. Why not us? You should be giving flexibility for drugs for Duchenne patients when there's evidence that it works, when there's evidence that it's safe, because we need these drugs. And if you're going to be flexible for other folks, this is a perfect opportunity to be flexible as well, given that the data are so strong and the need is so great.
Right. No, I think what we in this community request and obviously deserve is a fair and full review of drugs that can be useful to our community, because we've always talked about, Sue, you and I talked about this from the day we met, we're going to have a combination of therapies. And so, it could be that as other therapies come online and are approved in this country and other countries, you want to build on the preservation that you have, right? I think there's not a parent that doesn't go to bed, or a young man with Duchenne who doesn't go to bed at night and wish for nothing further in terms of progression. So one of the questions came in, if the FDA doesn't approve, isn't willing to take a look, what happens to the 130 patients in the US who are currently taking Translarna?
Yeah, no, that's a real concern. And we've made a commitment to make sure that these patients get drugged. But there comes a point where there's not another trial to do. There's not another, you know what I mean? We've done everything that you could do over the last, 15, 20 years to demonstrate the efficacy of the drug and build an approach and a pathway to utilize the right endpoints to demonstrate effectiveness. And so what I want to do now is make sure we fight so that not only these 150 kids who have the drug, but there's plenty of other nonsense mutation patients who have not yet been able to get on drug. And I think that's all unfair. And so what we need to focus now on is you need to help us get an opportunity to be able to submit to the agency and have an advisory committee. And then we'll let the chips fall where they may, but we believe that if we have that opportunity, that'll allow it to be commercially available for patients so that everyone can get it, not just the 150 boys who've been on our trials in the US. And why is that? That's, seems to me, if a kid in Brazil or Peru or Colombia, right, or, Kazakhstan, if they could get it, why can't the Americans get it? It just seems to me unfair and not actually we have yet to sit down with the FDA to talk about this data with them face to face. I mean, to me, that's just unbelievable because look, I understand this is very complicated. You got a huge amount of data from multiple trials, and it's complicated. So it requires at least a conversation.
Yeah, and I think to help clarify too, because we had a few other questions come in. So the refusal for the submission was tied to a subgroup population that was pre-specified, and kind of what you're striving for is for them to look at the totality of the evidence that you've collected over the past number of years to exert some of the regulatory flexibility that the agency talks about. And that's, I think, what is kind of being looked at here. You've collected all this data over these years from these multiple clinical trials. You have your STRIDE registry data, and that's the goal, to be able to have kind of an open discussion, and have the FDA look at all of the data that you've collected to this point.
Right.
So what is the?
So what
I
are
guess,
your?
yeah, I think
Go
we're
on.
about to ask the same thing, Pat. What is the next direct step, I guess, with the FDA and where we go from here?
Sure. Matt, you want to go through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, what we really want is the ability to sit down and have a live conversation. And so we're going to be planning to submit a request to meet with the agency in person. We have already sent an email saying that we are going to be doing that, to give them a heads up, and we'll plan to submit a formal meeting request so that we can have the opportunity to sit down and have a live conversation and understand more clearly what their concerns are with the data we have, why they gave us the initial response they gave, and also put us in a position to really strongly and clearly state the case of why these data are more than strong enough, Pat, as you said, to give us a fair and full evaluation with an application. And just to fill in, that's likely to occur over the course of the next few months. The processes for meeting requests and back and forth with the FDA are never quite fast. They tend to take a little bit of time. So that's something that's going to unfold over the next 2 to 3 months.
Well, no, thank you for that. That's helpful, and I think helps the community as well understand kind of what that timeline looks like, and what they should be on the lookout. We did have one question come in from one of the families who said, when they were at one of their clinic visits, they were told there might be a shortage of medication, and so they were told that there may be more in February 2023. So I think they're trying to understand, should they be concerned? Are they going to have continued access to the therapy, or to the investigational product as it's in development?
No, I don't think there should be any concern on that. It said they were told that medication we got a smaller amount. I'll have to look into that, but there should be no reason.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions around, and I think this will probably come up as you go forward with meeting with the FDA, if there's opportunities for patients or select families to be able to kind of share their stories in that process. I'm sure we have some individuals that would like to be able to share. But
Absolutely. Whenever we think that's such an important part, and we've talked about when we had the AdCom many years ago, that they had that opportunity, and we certainly would be grateful for when the opportunity comes for folks to share their stories.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to say approve this drug. I think the step is to review the drug. Give us an advisory committee.
Right.
Give us a chance to have it reviewed and a process taken.
Which is, I think, fair, and I think what all the families who've taken the time to participate in all these studies over the years want is just the opportunity to make sure that the time they committed to these trials is seen by the regulators, and the process can go through and a decision can be made, but to be given the chance to have a decision made. So yeah, Stuart, Matthew, thank you both. I think this was really helpful to take the time to talk to the community and understand better this process, because this is not something that we've run into, a lot at this stage with, a product that's been in development for this long with this type of evidence. And so I think that really helped provide a lot of clarity. And, I'm sure we'll be happy to continue working with you as this moves forward.
And we thank you for that. We appreciate. Look, we've had a long and great relationship with this community and particularly you guys, and so we appreciate it. I think now is sort of the time we all got to get together and figure out a way to make this happen. So thank you.
Yeah, I think all families deserve to be heard. So thank you very much.
And as a reminder to everyone who's on today, the recording of this should be up probably sometime early in the next week. So if you have friends and family members that you would like to share this with, please do so, and you can direct them back to PPMD's website. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.